I'm Greg Nettle, and I serve as president of Stadia Church Planting, where our vision is for every child on the planet to have a church, access to the hope of Jesus. We're all about starting, thriving, growing, multiplying churches for the next generation. Welcome to the Church Planting Podcast. I'm so excited for today's guest, Mrs. Heidy Tandy. She serves on the Stadia team along with me, but she's the Senior Director of Discovery. Really exciting stuff to talk about today. She has 18 years of experience in higher education, church leadership. She and her husband planted a church. She helps guide leaders through the entire discovery process to plant a church. She's all about empowering women in leadership to the full extent of their ability. So we have a great guest. Welcome to the show, the Church Planting Podcast. Well, I'm here with my friend and colleague, an amazing leader, Heidy Tandy. Heidy, welcome to the Church Planting Podcast.
Thanks, Greg. I am so excited to be here and to talk about this journey and discovery with you today.
Okay, when I said colleague, I mean that literally. You're on the Stadia team, and that's specifically why I wanted to talk with you. What's your role on the Stadia team?
Yes, I serve on the CD team as the Senior Director of Discovery. I've been on the team for 5 years, and probably more importantly than that, I started a church with my husband with Stadia in 2013. And so it's been a long journey that gets me to this seat, but love Stadia and love being part of the church planting starting journey.
Yeah, I mean, I love this. You're a church planter, you have the credibility, and now you have years of history with Stadia Church Planting, and I know you're sold out to the mission, vision, and values. Wait, you're talking about discovery, though, and for many of our listeners, they're not going to know what discovery is. In fact, for years when I came on board with Stadia, it was called CPAC, the Church Planting Assessment Center, which no longer exists in that form. It's discovery now. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we love acronyms in the church planting world. And so CPAC, Church Planting Assessment Center, I went through it with my husband, Josh, in 2011, a few years ago. And we went through a shift in 2022 from CPAC to Discovery. It was a shift that took place last summer, but the journey was much longer than that. The process was much longer than that. Really, in the mid 2010s, we began to learn that we needed to make shifts in our process that reflected our mission and vision. If we want to see every child have a church, then our process of helping leaders uncover and discern what God's doing in their life in terms of potentially starting a new church, we knew that we had shifts that we needed to make in that process.
Okay, before we jump into what those shifts have been, let's get to the why as well, because totally. One of the things we discovered is that in the United States, I believe last year and the year before that, our church planters launching in the United States, about 40% plus were church planters of color. Mm-hmm. And our processes were really designed for white males in suburban launch large contexts. And that was good. That served Stadia very well for years. Absolutely. But as the demographics have changed in the United States, right, as we look at, more than 50% of children under the age of 18 in the United States alone being children of color, if we're serious about every child having a church, if we're serious about the church reflecting, the book of Revelation, chapter 7, where every tribe, tongue, and nation are going to gather together for worship, we realized that we actually were putting some barriers in place for many planters who were planters of color, but not just that, but who were planting in other modalities. Does that say the why correctly?
Absolutely. And you and I both know that if we want every child to have a church, we need more churches. Today's churches aren't enough. And so if we want every child to have a church, then our definition and our application of every has to change. And so we did some data gathering and realized that our process was not as positive or even helpful for women and people of color. And so we lamented that that experience for women and people of color. We really grieved at those places where we knew we had improvements to make. And then, more importantly, we took time to pause and to lean into people that are much smarter than me. Dr. Cedric Johnson, Dr. Yukon, Michael Carey, and Kimberly Deckel, Emily Diaz. There is an army of people who have spoke into this process to help us be better. And it was painful at times, Greg. Let's acknowledge that.
Well, yeah. I mean, we publicly repented just because we knew we had, it was inadvertent, but that's somewhat irrelevant, right? We didn't know what we didn't know. And we're not knocking people that have gone before us by any way.
Absolutely.
I mean, God has used the processes and systems, but the reality was we recognized that we'd done some inadvertently hurtful things unknowingly. But again, it's irrelevant. We still needed to say, man, we are sorry. We have lamented. We've repented. Now we want to move forward with this new process. So let's jump into some of the shifts from assessment, if you will, to discovery.
Yes. So the big shift, and you just heard about this the other day because Greg went through our training and how we train what we call our guides now instead of assessors, is that we want to sit in a seat that is not the sage on the stage, which comes from an educational theory, but the guide on the side. We want to come alongside what God's already doing in the story of a new church leader or a potential new church leader and say, okay, this is what God's doing. How can we help guide you? How can we help take what we've learned over the years and what we've learned from others over the years to help make recommendations and guidance to come alongside you, not sit in a seat of power that says we are great and wise Stadia and we want to say yes or no and kind of play God in that seat. We want to support whatever God's doing with the Holy Spirit to come alongside and say, this is what we see and this is how we can help. So practically.
Let's jump into the practicalities.
Practically, we know that we want to see all kinds of new church leaders. So our group of guides has to be representative of those new church leaders.
Okay, this is a big shift.
Yes, huge shift. We want to make sure that if we have micro church planters in the room, that they're hearing from a micro church planter from stage. We want, if there are women lead planters in the room, we want them to hear from women lead planters on stage. We want there to be women on every team, more than one woman on every team, to make sure that we are providing an environment of honor and care. So we fully believe you can't be what you can't see in terms of representation and how we show value to the people in the room. And so that is a huge practical shift that we are making. It's not just a high D on the disc profile leader or potentially just like a high entrepreneurial competence leader on stage. It's everyone who can make an impact in the local church, which we have in a positive way blown open the doors on that. We want more churches, so we need more church leaders.
Okay, so we talk about modalities, and when I was in church planting, I mean, when I was planting our church, the only modality that I really knew about was kind of the launch large model, which is, oh my gosh, just one of a plethora of models now. Like we said, we have micro church, you have digital church, you have bivocational, co-vocational, virtual. I mean, we could just go on down the list. And so what you're saying is now discovery will help people regardless of what modality they're coming into the process?
Absolutely. And we love our launch large folks. There is still absolutely room and practicality for that in the world. And I love what leaders like Micah Davis are doing in Indianapolis in a co-leadership, collaborative leadership model, where they're leading with a group. I love what Lungs McCalla is doing in Chicago as a co-vocational leader who is also on our discovery team. What Valerie Grimes is doing in Savannah. We need all kinds of church leaders, and I really believe our process is positioned to serve.
Okay, and so we have multi-modalities that are coming in, but then we have multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-socioeconomical. And if I'm understanding correctly, what you're saying is our guides and those coming alongside now also represent those different ethnicities and so forth.
Absolutely. Now, this is slow work. You don't just start this work one day and immediately have a perfect group that represents everybody in the room. We want to understand where we are in the process, Greg. But we've done some really intentional work on the discovery side of saying that we want our guide team to be representative of the candidates that we serve. And so last year, we were at about 30% people of color on our guide team. And now, as we head into an event next week, we are at 50% women in our guide team and 40% people of color. And so,
I was just blown away. I was on a call with you just a couple of days ago because I'm actually headed to Chicago on Monday morning to be one of those guides and experience this entire new process. I'm so excited about that. And thank you for the invitation to get to go experience it. Okay, so the one of the big practical shifts has been just kind of, representation of multi-everything. What are some other shifts?
We want to practically understand that it takes a lot of different models of funding to support church planting efforts in 2023. We used to do some really specific fundraising training and fundraising, looking at those competencies in our CPAC process, but we realized that served some people, but it didn't serve everyone. And so we're asking more questions. We're saying, how do you hope to financially sustain the church that you're hoping to start? What will that look like? How are you going to be creative in your community, in your context? And speaking of community and context, we believe that God has a really specific calling for you in your community. So I'm a Midwest person, Greg. I grew up in the Midwest. I would not be positioned well to start a church in California, where some of our other folks, one of our great teammates has started a church in Long Beach, right? That's not me. But we started our church in a community that we understood. So not only are church planting competencies important, but context is so important. How do you understand the community? And so we're asking more questions about that, not just saying, do you have a specific set of skills?
Okay, so let's come back to the financing because it's such an important piece of church planting. And I think what I hear you saying is there's a big difference between a funding model for a micro church movement and a launch large church. There's different fundraising training for a Latina who's going to be a bivocational planter like Lumar Vargas up here in Cleveland, where I live, and a different funding model for a digital church planter. And rather than saying, okay, here's how the fundraising works, we're actually helping to customize, I believe, the right fit for all of our church planters now.
Yes. And it's not that we know all the things about all the models and exactly everything you would need, but we are committed to learning and to finding out and connecting potential new church leaders to the people that have the wisdom that they need. We want to be a resource, not the hero.
Okay, so one of the things over the years, CPAC, Church Planter Assessment Center, had the reputation for being very robust, very intense, very stressful. How does that compare? Is it still that way at Discovery?
I love this question. Absolutely, this process is rigorous and robust. We've actually increased what new church leaders do on the front end, but what we've done in person is that we have really taken an opportunity with our pause to say, what is the best thing that we can do on the 3 days when we're together to make sure that we're making the best recommendations? Everything is purposeful in what we do in our process.
Okay, so, I think it's even more robust than it was before. I agree with that. It needs to be. Now, absolutely. But okay, so people finish up. They're at the end of day 3. We've got all these teams there. I'm going to be part of one. And, they're still going, I mean, let's talk about some of the things they've just gone through. There's a psychological evaluation. What else are they going through?
Yeah, so our full process is broken into 3 phases. The first phase we call exploration. That phase digs into the question, am I called? So they tell their story, basically, and are able to really lean in and discern that question. They also do some spiritual gifts testing there. The second phase is, am I ready? We believe that new church leaders shouldn't be perfect, but we do believe there is a baseline of holistic health that sets up the potential new church leader for success, whether they're married, single, have kids, don't have kids. We believe there should be a base level of health. So this is where the psychological evaluation comes in. Our current psychological evaluation includes different practitioners. We are able to offer a Spanish-speaking element for those that are bilingual or speak Spanish only, which we're super thrilled about. We also do a financial readiness reflection where they're able to think about how they've been generous and how they want to be generous in the future. They do a marriage assessment, those kind of things. That readiness process is huge. Then when we're in person, Greg, which you'll experience next week, we really dig into new church leader competencies. And so these competencies are evident across the board, regardless of model, mode, or context. And we do activities based around the competency so that we can make the best recommendation for a new church.
Okay,
leader.
talk about those competencies. Give me some of the competencies.
So we have 4 main competency areas. First one is gospel competence. We believe that new church leaders should know the gospel. This is the first competence. The other competencies, if you have those but don't have gospel competence, you shouldn't start a church.
Right.
I'm not trying to be spicy there. We believe that new church leaders should know the gospel, be passionate about the gospel, be fluent, and communicate the gospel in a way that works with their context. Second competency area is cultural and contextual competence. This is not knowing everything about all cultures. This is about having a level of cultural awareness, contextual awareness of where you're going to be starting churches and the ability to move within different cultures. A third area is relational competence. We believe new church leaders should be able to work and play well with others, read a room, those kind of competencies. And then finally, entrepreneurial competence. Leadership is huge. But like we've talked about already, Greg, I believe that leadership in a new church context can look really diverse in terms of the context, the model, the mode. And so visioning, grit, empowering others is still huge, no matter where you're going to start a church. It's just the application looks different.
It really is true. I was with a group of church planters up here in Cleveland this past Sunday evening, and they all agreed that, and I know this is true around the world, but they said here in Cleveland, which is kind of, I think the statement is, Cleveland is littered with the bones of church planters. But I was so proud of these church planters because they are thriving now. I think it's like there's 5 Stadia church plants up here. They're doing so well, and we're so excited about that. But they said the number one characteristic that you need in Cleveland is grit, which Absolutely. So I'm happy to hear that's kind of measured in one of the competencies that we're going after.
Absolutely. And we even do a measure with our psychological evaluation that gives us a metric of grit from our practitioner. And so grit is huge. We know that church planting is hard. That's not a medal that we wear, but it's a reality of the work. And so we want new church leaders who can get back up when they get knocked down.
Okay, so this is robust. I'm glad I'm not going through it now to plant a church.
Same.
And so they get to the end of the 3 days, and then the teams meet with the church planter individually or couples, depending on are they married or single. And what happens at that point? I mean, is it green, red, yellow, or is it no way ever, or go? What happens there?
Yeah. So our recommendations, we have 4 recommendations, and we have the first recommendation is go now.
You're ready.
You're ready. That is rare. It's rare for us to give that type of a recommendation. But usually it lands in one of these next 3. Recommend with conditions. These are an as you go recommendation. So we say go, you have the calling competencies, readiness to start a new church, But these are some things that you might want to work on that we recommend on the journey. So maybe
give us some examples, a couple examples of that.
Yeah. So potentially it would be establishing a network of support, getting connected to other people who have done this before. Maybe it's establishing some proactive mental health in your area. Maybe it's potentially figuring out some practical things like funding, like getting to know the community better. But you're ready. You just have some things to work on as you go.
Okay, so go with recommendations. What's the third one?
Third one is short-term development. So this would be before you go. So these are some things that you need to take care of before you go. Maybe this is more robust learning. Maybe it's a residency. Maybe it is you need to have a season of rest or focus on your family or marriage.
Maybe some marriage counseling. Maybe, hey, you got to get your personal finances in order because they're a train wreck before you go. Yep. Okay.
Yep.
And then what's the fourth?
Long-term development. This is not a no. This is a no for now. We don't want to sit in the seat. We talked about power earlier. We don't want to sit in the seat and say, this is a no forever. But we would say with what we've learned, with what we've seen in the full process, we would not recommend starting a church for the next 2 years. And so this is long-term development. We still give very specific recommendations of things to work on that informed the not yet. And then if someone receives a long-term development and still leans into potentially starting a new church, wants to partner with Stadia, they would go through our process again after 2 years.
Oh, geez. Okay. But I mean, it's true. It's good. If I'm going out to plant a church, I want to know. I really do. I would much rather know now that, hey, I've got some things to work on or, some, theology training. I mean, so many planters are coming out of the marketplace and so forth, which I'm thrilled about. But they actually do need some theology training. And some of that you can get as you go. But for some people, it may be more intense, right? And they're going to need to take a year of classes or whatever to get ready.
Yeah, it's all about stewarding the responsibility of leadership. And so that's what our recommendations are about, is these steps will help you to steward the privilege that it is. Even though it's hard, the privilege that it is to start a new church.
Okay, let me ask you a couple questions now as we kind of roll this close. I'm a person listening to this podcast right now, watching it on, video. And I think God might be calling me. I feel a tug. How do I start the process?
Awesome. Well, you can go to our website, stadia.org, and our discovery page will walk you through everything that Greg and I have talked about on this call.
What about pricing?
Here's the thing, Greg. We believe in our process so much that this process is at no cost to a new church leader. No cost. We depend on the generosity of our partners, networks, individual investors to help fund this, because we don't want the financial piece to be an access point that limits starting new churches. And so we depend on all of that external funding to allow potential new church leaders to experience all of this at no cost.
Wow. All right. Well, I am so excited to experience this, Heidi. I can't, I'll see you on Monday in Chicago. Thank you for being on the Church Planting Podcast.
Yeah. Thanks, Greg. I could talk about this for hours. So thanks for giving me the honor of sharing about it.